everyone, thank you for tuning in. Ahead of World Poetry Day on March the 21st, I'm interviewing some of the poets who stock with the Book Dragon. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Philip Naughton. Hi,
Hi there. How you doing, Michelle?
I'm well, thank you. So you've very kindly agreed to answer some questions for me. So I'd like to start with, when did you first discover your gift for writing poetry?
I don't know if I ever did, to be honest. It just sort of came along as life went by, I think. My mother enjoyed a lot of poetry, and I was like limericks and odd little bits of rhyming, and was intrigued by kind of Cockney rhyming slang and things like that, although I've never lived in London. And then I think it became more aware of it when I started doing the White Blade Chronicles for the Epic Fantasy series, because in each of the chapters I have a little starter to the chapter, which can be a bit of philosophy or something happening or an extract from another book in the fantasy world. And some of that also involves poetry to set the scene for the chapter. So I think that's where I started believing where it came from, and I could do poetry.
And which poets inspired you?
A bit of a random mix. I think the First World War poets. Brooke and Owen and people like that, because they had a big message to tell, and it was also in a way difficult for them to put that message across between their experiences on the in the trenches and then becoming, if you like, anti-war and the sentiment in the poems
Mhm.
because of their experiences. There's another unusual one, which is Sylvia Plath. So I don't know if anybody's heard of that particular lady. She was a 1940s, 50s, had a very sad life and died young, and wrote in waves of deep depression. So her father died when she was 8. And she really founded what was called confessional poetry in America. So it's about writing about some major event that's happened in your life full of kind of raw emotion. And I think the only other one, which sounds a bit strange, was Virgil's Aeneid, because I
Okay.
had to do Latin at school and we did the Latin version of Book 12. But for a 14-year-old schoolboy, it was a really exciting Trojan Wars. And
Mhm.
obviously, it doesn't rhyme in English, but it did in Latin. But you still get the feel of the words of, born on a foaming horse. I mean, that was to start one part of the book. I mean, it just says a lot in its own way. So I think that's where the background came from.
Yeah, fantastically eclectic mix there.
Yep.
So, what is your favorite poem that you've written, and can you recite us a few lines?
Oh yes, yeah, I can indeed. I think my favourite poem is in the Bits and Bobs book, and it's called The Lost Virginie, and it's actually quite short. And I liked it so much because it was just one of those things that happens not too often, where it just came from nowhere and came together very quickly. And it was a combination of a print of a flower girl I've got up on my wall in my house
Okay.
and doing a French lesson. And I was in Germany at the time, living and working there. And the idea came, and the end of the first draft was done in 40 minutes. And then there was about an hour of polishing, and it was done.
Wow.
And it was originally for the fantasy book, but I also realized it had a very sort of valid historical set, scenario within, our mankind and our history. And it's really to do with persecution. This particular instance was a persecution of the Huguenots in France, but it's applicable to a lot of persecutions that have happened all the way through history and Highland clearances and 101 or 1,000 other ones that would do it. So what I'd like to do is just read the kind of last 3 verses of, if I could,
Yeah, of course.
rather than the start of it. So
Mhm.
basically, it's a young girl, 15, 14, 16, around that age, who is all by herself. She comes across a man and he just starts talking to her, and she kind of explains the story. Um, so if I can read the last 4 verses, they're just 4-line stanzas, so it won't take very long.
Oh, no, it's
So
perfect. Thank you.
I looked at her in horror, my face aghast, imagining this abandoned young girl in front of the mast. So where will you go now, my sad Virginie? Where will you go now? You have crossed the big sea. I will go where there is food. I will go where there is hope. I will live on the beach or a hill with a slope. I will work dusk to dawn and then dawn to dusk. I will fight with the chickens for a handful of husk. I will die young, my hands warm to the bone. I will die young, most likely alone. My mother's words in my heart for all eternity. I will never be for sale, even in dire poverty. Now I must go and beg for my fare. Then I must travel from here to somewhere. As she scampered away, asking nothing for me, I prayed for mercy for the pitiful lost Virginie.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us.
That's all right.
So, what advice would you give to anyone who's wanting to start writing poetry?
Don't be afraid. Don't be scared of it. And don't think that it's always like sitting in a classroom with Tennyson or Keats or somebody and having to learn it and analyze it and probably put a lot of poetry off people for life from what I've heard from sort of a lot of people I've spoken to over the years. So a thing to understand with poetry is it's not like the rest of the written work. In my mind, I look upon it. It's like clay in a potter's wheel, and you can just make whatever you want for it because it allows you to change words, mix words up. It always doesn't have to be in rhyme. Punctuation's important, but you can really structure it. And a lot of poetry is emotional. It carries messages. It carries a story. So there's this vast empty canvas that can be filled. So just don't be scared for it. Be excited by it. Find your words. Pick something out. Think of a situation and just throw everything at it. And if there's a poem in there, it'll come out.
That's good advice.
Mm-hmm.
And you can buy Philip Naughton's wonderful collection of poetry and short stories, bits and bobs, as well as all his other brilliant books from our bookshop at 6 West Row, Stockton-on-Tees, or from our website, thebookdragon.co.uk. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And
Thank you for having me.
Oh, a pleasure. And thank you everyone for watching. I'll see you next time.